Welcome to the Pure Bible Podcast, The Word Unfiltered. The theme of this first series is grace and forgiveness, and we will be looking at Psalm 51. We want to see, first of all, what that psalm meant to the ancient Israelites as they received it, part of their personal devotional life and also their corporate worship together. And then, of course, to see what it means for us as we follow Christ today. But first, I want to share with you my heart about the Pure Bible podcast. What's been my intention in devising this project? What do I want to achieve? Now, assuming you want to be part of this, I want to look at the scriptures with you, to examine the plain meaning of the text, pure Bible. This sounds obvious and even a bit mundane, but actually many times Christians and even preachers skip over what the text actually says and what it means. Instead, they jump immediately to what the Bible verse or text says to them subjectively. That may work for a time, but in the end it can bring confusion. If that's only what we do, then we never really come to understand the Bible. We never get to grips with what it actually says and what it actually means. Let me give you an example. Psalm 91 is known as a wonderful psalm of protection. It was originally written in a messianic context. It's describing the protection that God promised Messiah. We see this clearly from verses 11 and 12. For he will command his angels concerning you to guard you in all your ways. On their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. Now we know that this is quoted in the New Testament. Indeed, Satan uses this psalm. He knew it was about Messiah. That's why he was trying to confuse Jesus in the wilderness, in the temptation in the wilderness. Now, we are correct in seeing this psalm by extension as a promise of protection for us. But in its original context, it's about Jesus. If we miss that, then we miss out on something very wonderful and important. The Old Testament finds its fulfillment in the life and ministry of Jesus. You see how our understanding and our confidence in the scriptures and the plan of God grows when we see Psalm 91 in its context. Now, we're going to examine one important way of looking at the Psalms in general, and Psalm 51 in particular in its context, and that's the use of titles. The title of the overall book, Psalms, and the titles that appear often at the beginning of each particular psalm. Now, the title of the book, we get the English title from the Greek word psalmos, which translates the Hebrew mizmor, song, and that's found in many psalms titles and simply translated as psalm. Now, the Greek name for the book was established by the time of the New Testament. The Hebrew name for the book, tehillim, means praises, pointing to the characteristic use of these songs as praises offered in public worship. This comes from the root halal. You might have heard of that, praise, to extol. But the Hebrew title for the Psalms, praises, may have originally reflected the idea, which is found today, that adoration and thanks to God are the primary acts of worship. But it would be better to learn from the title of the entire Psalter that the whole range of the Psalms, from adoration and thanks to the needy cry for help, all of this praises God because they're offered to him in the gathered worship of his people. Now, I've quoted more or less directly from the ESV Study Bible for that, and it's a good reference point for studying the book of Psalms and other passages in the Bible as well. Now, Psalm 51 is a worship song in the form of a lament. It's about sin, repentance, and restoration of King David, who committed adultery, treachery, and multiple murders to cover his tracks. So we got to ask the question, how can that be an appropriate topic for worship? Well, it's a song of lament, penitence, repentance, and restoration. So that's edifying. It's the story of a restoration of God's faithfulness to his promises to the Davidic covenant. So there's a prophetic element there, which is edifying. And also it's a warning to us all of the consequences of sin upon an individual, a family, a community, and a whole nation. David was forgiven, but his sin continued to have serious consequences. And so it's the story of every person. We're all in the same boat. We're all sinners in need of grace and forgiveness. I don't know if you've heard that saying, which is considered to be very spiritual, when Christians are talking about somebody who has fallen and sinned, and they believe they're being very humble when they say, "There, but by the grace of God go I." I don't think Psalm 51 would allow you to say that. If you are worshiping God using Psalm 51, its words and thoughts and theological themes, you're not saying, "There go I, but by the grace of God." You are saying, "There go I." In a real sense, David's story is about all of us. It's also an important part of the developing story of the Davidic kingdom. David was a kind of prototype for the king to come, the Messiah. But he was not the Messiah. He was a sinner whose failure shows that he was not the one Israel was to look to. But another one was coming, who would be the ideal, perfect king and redeemer of Israel. So for all of these reasons, the psalm is an appropriate psalm for worship, given how the psalms cover the full range of human emotions and experiences: a psalm of restoration, a psalm of lament, a psalm of penitence, and a prophetic psalm pointing to the fulfillment of the greater one who was to come, the greater one, the true Messiah who was to come. So let's go now to the title of Psalm 51. It says, "To the choirmaster, a psalm of David, when Nathan the prophet went to him after he had gone into Bathsheba." Now, the Anchor Yale commentary says this about this wording here. It says, "The wording of the Hebrew seems to reflect the literary theological law of biblical religion, that for every action there is a corresponding reaction. Nathan's visit to David balances his visit to Bathsheba." I think that's a helpful comment. So the superscription here, or the title, seems to have a valuable function, setting the psalm in context, setting our mind in the direction of interpretation, how we should read it, what we should think about as we are going through the psalm. Now, I want to point out that these words in the English Bible appear above the psalm, but in the Hebrew Bible, they form part of the psalm. So verse 1 in our English Bibles actually is verse 3 in the Hebrew Bible. These titles, though part of the Hebrew Bible, appear to have been added later and not necessarily part of the original psalm. Now, what are some reasons for concluding that? Well, they appear to be added by someone other than the person writing the psalm. It's written in the third person, where the psalms might be in the first person. And all the titles of the psalms seem to be written in the same style, and not in the actual style of the psalm. And also, for example, here this is addressed to the choirmaster, suggesting that the psalms were collected and developed over time to become the official worship songbook for Jewish worship, for use in the temple and also in daily life. They also include musical terms or instructions on how the psalm was to be performed in temple worship. So it suggests to me that the titles were not part of the original psalm, they were added later. We know they were well established before the 2nd and 3rd centuries BC. That's when the Hebrew Bible was translated into Greek. Now, some say these titles are canonical, though not part of the original text of the psalm. Others would conclude that the titles are not divinely inspired in the same way the actual text of the psalms is, but nonetheless, they are both helpful and important. They are historical and reliable. And there's one more point on this title. It's addressed to the choirmaster, which would be the choir director today, the worship director in most modern churches. We are familiar with that terminology. But this is a reminder that the psalm was written to be as part of the ancient worship of Israel, or the worship of ancient Israel and observant Jews today. And for us as New Testament believers, the book of Psalms, including Psalm 51, shows the all-inclusive nature of worship. Every part of life, every experience in life, all our joys and pains, our successes and our failures are to be included in our worship and praise to God. Every detail of our lives is important to God, and the whole of our lives is to be lived in an attitude and expression of worship. So as we go on in this series to look at Psalm 51, let's have our hearts in an attitude of worship and devotion. And even when we are looking at painful and uncomfortable things, painful and uncomfortable emotions, know that it can all be lifted up to God and addressed to Him in worship, who knows and who understands and who hears the cries of our heart.